Hi, everybody. My name is Leslie Shoemaker, and welcome to our event about unconscious bias. Before we start, I just wanted to take a moment to thank our amazing team who've been making these events with me for the last 2 years. We have Michelle Luby, who's one of the founding members of Women in Technology United. We also have Rebecca Jones, who is the founder of Building Esteem. Today we have a guest with us, Catherine Luby, who is an engineering lecturer in Blanchardstown and also a member of Women in Technology United. Unfortunately, Amy Moles, who is an absolute champion of EDI and a lecturer in engineering and Tala, is unable to be with us today, as well as Therese Fitzgerald, who is the founder of the Women Building the Future Lunches with Access to Apprenticeship. But today's topic is about unconscious bias. And as I continue to learn about this topic, I'm amazed to see how prevalent, how important this topic is, because it impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about this discussion today. And on that note, I'm now going to hand over to Michelle Luby, who is our moderator.
Thanks very much, Leslie, and welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be here. And I'd also like to thank the team. It's been great being part of this team that's put the event together. So I'd just like to take an opportunity to thank you all and everyone who's helped put this together. There's also been some people behind the scenes. And as Leslie has said, this event is about understanding what unconscious bias is so we can increase our awareness of it and challenge it in our everyday lives. And to help us do this, I'm delighted to welcome our panel today who will help us to unravel this important topic. So I'd first like to welcome Jean O'Donnell, who's Deputy Chair of WITS, Women in Technology and Science Ireland. So welcome, Jean. I'd also like to welcome Damien Owens, who is Registrar of Engineers Ireland. So welcome, Damien. I'd like to welcome Rhonda Doyle, who's Director Operations, Service and Projects with Schneider Electric. Welcome, Rhonda. And I'd like to welcome Tracy Kearney, who's Director of Structures in DBFL Consulting Engineers. So welcome to all of our panelists. I'd also like to welcome our keynote speaker here today, Yvonne Galligan. And Yvonne is Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion and Professor of Comparative Politics in TU Dublin. And Yvonne is the daughter of a mechanical engineer and has said that for her, the smell of heavy diesel engines brings back happy childhood memories. So Yvonne is passionate about girls and young women having every opportunity to follow their ambitions. So thanks so much, Yvonne, for being here today. But before I hand over to Yvonne, Rebecca is going to tell us about a feedback survey that we'd like to invite the participants to do at the end of the webinar. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I'm really excited about today's event. There is a feedback survey. We really appreciate and value your input. It's really important in designing and future-proofing these events. So if you could fill that in, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. And now I'd like to invite Yvonne to give the keynote address. So over to you, Yvonne, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for your kind introduction, and welcome everyone to this Esteem live panel discussion on understanding and tackling unconscious bias in apprenticeship, computing and engineering. So unconscious bias, as the term suggests, is unconscious. It means that we do it without realizing it. And we can think of this bias, this unconscious bias, as a mental shortcut that our brain makes when we are prompted or faced with a choice. And these mental shortcuts that we make translate into attitudes that affect the way we feel and think about others around us. So, for example, we might listen to men more attentively than to women, as we have absorbed the idea that what men have to say is more important than what women say and think. In a real-world example, we know that students give male teachers better evaluations than their female teachers for no obvious reason. And we know that in the world of work, people hire men over women, even though they may have similar qualifications, skills, and experience. These are all examples of unconscious bias at work. These types of biases tend to rely on stereotypes, and they can result in discriminatory practices when people are not valued for their individual talents and aptitudes. The way to overcome the unconscious biases that we all hold, and we all do hold them, is through conscious reflection and working on our self-awareness. And we have to continue to do this. Doing one course in unconscious bias training isn't enough. It's something that we have to bring to everything that we do, to remind ourselves and ask ourselves, are we falling into the trap of a mental shortcut and therefore a stereotype? Or are we truly considering what the person that we are facing is saying or thinking or reflecting on? Now, in TU Dublin, we tackle unconscious bias through staff awareness raising, through being careful about the decisions we make during recruitment, and by having events such as this one that directly tackle gender stereotypes. And we need more and continually to have all of these kinds of activities. In TU Dublin, we have a new gender equality plan, and it has an action to have events with stereotype breaking role models, male stereotype breakers, female stereotype breakers, people of non-binary gender identity, and people of diverse profiles. This wonderful event today is exactly the sort of conversation we should be having, with inspirational speakers who uphold gender equality and challenge the unconscious gender biases in engineering, computing, and apprenticeships. So welcome to TU Dublin, to our esteemed programme, and to the important discussion today. I'm now going to hand back to Michelle to continue with the conversation. So thank you all very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Yvonne. And you mentioned about our inspirational speakers. Well, I can tell you that was very inspirational, what you just said there. So thank you so much. And it was really insightful and really starts to unravel what unconscious bias is about and why it's so important and it's so prevalent in our everyday lives. So thank you so much for that again, Yvonne, and for sharing that with us. And it really gives a strong foundation for the discussion we're going to have now. So I'd like to invite our panelists to share their experience and insights now. And to build on what Yvonne has said, I'd like to invite each of them to share with us what is their interpretation of what unconscious bias is. And Tracy, if I come to you first, could you share with us what your interpretation is?
I will, thanks, Michelle. I suppose from my perspective, unconscious biases are biases that we're often completely unaware of, but we nevertheless act on. And I think society as a whole is influenced by unconscious biases. I know you might feel that men and women in 2022 should be equally associated with science and engineering, but I think statistics show, or the global IAT results show, that I think 70% of people would readily associate male with science and females with the arts. And 76% would associate males with career and females with family. So the perception is still there, underlying the kind of gender roles. And I think that's something that we have to kind of consciously address every day, really, in as employers and as educators. But I think as well, we have to forget, even on a one-to-one basis, not forget that on a one-to-one basis, when we meet a person, we process the person's ethnicity, their gender, their age, their size, disability and lots of other characteristics before we even know we've done it, you know, and we make judgments and decisions on our perception. We form a perception of what we think that person is without even knowing them. And I suppose that influences how we interact with the person. It influences how friendly we might be, how much we'll actively listen to them, and how much we may or may not support them. And I think we might have a well-received, the same, I suppose, idea from one person will be well-received, and the same idea from a different person might not get the same reception. I think we just need to be aware of that, and maybe just be conscious that we kind of accept each person as an individual, and not let our preconceived perceptions of them influence how we interact with them. But that's something we have to do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tracy. Yeah, it is so important there to challenge our preconceived conceptions. So thank you for that. Really, really good points there. And Damien, I'll come to you next. What's your interpretation of what unconscious bias is?
Well, I suppose unconscious biases are really the implicit biases and attitudes that we hold subconsciously, but they impact the way we see and, more importantly, feel about other people. I think that then influences our behaviour. And it's important to know that other people have these biases looking at us also. But in the context of engineering, the unconscious bias, particularly for engineering apprenticeships, information technology, people hold the view that, say, apprenticeships are perhaps a lower form of learning, or you will learn less, which, you know, that can certainly be challenged. Or that, you know, engineering work is mucky and dirty and no place for girls. And again, nothing is further. The reality is quite different. There's very few civil engineers, mechanical engineers. A lot of the work, design work, validation work, is all screen-based, as we've all been doing during the pandemic. But it's also, I think, important to recognise that biases can be both good and bad. I mean, some biases are hardwired into us from evolution. They've really evolved quickly to help us make decisions in an emergency. So we all shudder when we see a snake or a spider, but they're not all poisonous, and very few actually are. So, but we're not in that environment anymore in the workplace, but that's the way we are hardwired. The biases do help us produce quite a lot of information. When there's a lot of information presented, we just make these decisions because we've done it before, and we know we're right. Of course, we're always right. And, you know, because we know these factors, allows us to not have to process too much information, and we can process other items. So it can help us adapt to situations quickly. We need to know why we're making these decisions, and this equally applies to engineers and engineering students.
Yeah, thanks, Damien. That's really interesting, and it just highlights how it's so important that we have an awareness that we are, you know, thinking in this way, and that people can be having the same biases in regard to ourselves in the same way that we have to other people. So thanks very much for that, Damien. And Jean, what's your take on this?
Of course, I have to agree an awful lot with what Tracy and Damien have just said and described as their own understanding of unconscious bias. I think it's the part of us that makes assumptions about people, places, things without ever really understanding why we're making these assumptions. Occasionally, it can be based on a past experience, or it can also be it can also be based on things that, as Damien says, are just hardwired into us. I think a good example is, you know, we've all had that experience where we've met somebody, unconsciously we've made assumptions about them, and then we have that experience of being surprised by them and thinking, oh, I didn't realize that, you know, that they were like that or they could do that. And that's an example of our unconscious bias in action, because we've made an assumption about somebody based on signals that we're picking up, or the way that we're processing information from them, and then they surprise us because it turns out that our first impressions weren't accurate at all. Another example that I would always use around this as well is not just in terms of our experience of unconscious bias of people, but assumptions that we make about careers. So particularly in the STEM world, we have a lot of examples of people making assumptions that, oh, that career is not really for me, that's not for me at all, but we don't actually dive deep in to understand what's involved in a career. For me, when I talk to girls in particular in secondary school and in university, and I can see the inclination to shy away from STEM, I always say to them, you know, who doesn't want to build the future? And your STEM subjects, the breadth of options that are available to you, it's so broad that giving yourself the option to get involved in creating a future that's better for everybody, closing that door seems, without really investigating what's in there and what opportunities lie in front of you, I think sometimes that just comes from a place of unconscious bias where we think, oh, that's not for me, and we automatically decide without really understanding. So that would be my take on unconscious bias.
Yeah, some really good points again there, Jean. You know, I certainly have had that experience where you've met people, you've made assumptions, and then you realize that, you know, they're totally wrong. So it is so important. So thank you for that, Jean. And lastly, coming to you, Rhonda.
Hi, so yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said and would add, you know, it's the meaning that we bring to things. It's the stories that we tell ourselves. We often think of the stereotypes that are a lot in the media today, but if we bring it back to the stories that we tell ourselves, very aligned with Jean, that sometimes if I think about who might be listening today, it's maybe that course is not for me, maybe I'm not strong at maths, or maybe I'm not good at computers, and it's or maybe you're not being encouraged by your family down that direction, a little bit like what Damien said, if maybe it's not thought of as rewarding as financially. So it's all those stories that we tell ourselves that we may or may not be aware of, and how they might be impacting the career decisions that we then make, or the courses that people may select as well, and to be aware of those so that we can actually ask, well, is that true? Is that only a course for, you know, men typically in the past? What might the options be? What might the other roles be? I really liked when Damien said as well that people often perceive, well, maybe you're out on a construction site, when actually there's a huge amount of the work in other areas in design and other roles in engineering spaces as well. So bringing that awareness to people, and not just thinking about the stereotypes that we may all be familiar with. I really think it's important for people to know as well that biases can be both positive and negative, which Damien also said. So if you think about interviews, for example, you might lean towards people who are like you, even though they have similar experiences to bring to the table. Particularly as I think about women maybe settling out into courses at college, we like our social circles. And sometimes though, if you're going to be the first people to kind of break into those frontiers, we have to be aware that maybe, you know, the people like us are not always on the courses, and that's part of kind of getting into the diversity angle as well, in you know, just breaking into different social circles as well. So yeah.
Yeah, look, thanks so much, Rhonda. And you know, listening to everyone here, it's coming across that, you know, everyone can have different interpretations of unconscious bias, but there are key characteristics, you know, that can be subject to bias. And we're all sort of guilty, if we like, of having these assumptions, and that they can impact our careers and our choices and our path in life. So it's really important that we increase awareness of them. And I suppose key here is that these are unconscious biases that individuals can form outside of their own conscious awareness, and that everyone has them. And also really good just to point out that they can be, you know, they're not all negative, that there can be positive biases as well. So thank you all so much for that. And Damien, I'm just going to come back to you. So we've said that we all have biases. So is it okay to have biases? And, you know, what strategies can be used to address or manage our unconscious biases?
So yeah, I mean, biases are part of the human condition, so some can be positive, and like most things in life, getting a balance is the key. I think the first part of the strategy is to address unconscious biases, to recognize that we all have this. This can be a disturbing and unwelcome feeling because people are terrified of being called biased, or if they're accused of being biased. But we have to recognize it in ourselves. It's entirely natural to feel uncomfortable with that. And that itself is a bias, if you think about it. And once we accept our own attitude to bias, then we should be aware that other people will have these biases too. And therefore make allowances, and not I suppose, take offence where none is intended. But for example, if you're interviewing and getting a negative feeling about a candidate, then you really have to ask yourself why, and drill back, and take out some of the other effects, the halo effect and all those. And I mean, some biases are so prevalent that they're protected by law that we to make sure they don't occur. So a key is to probe our decisions, how we make them, how we identify potential biases. For engineering, parents in particular are very big influencers in what students choose, particularly at second level. And if we look at the .com era and the construction collapse, parents sort of influence their children not to go into engineering, into those areas, with the resulting lack of engineers 4 or 5 years later. What some of the universities have done, the universities normally go out to schools, secondary schools, to tell the students about engineering and the range of options there. But what some universities started to do is an evening time host events offsite in hotels, so that the secondary students come along with their parents, and it's the parents that you're educating and letting them see the range of engineering programs and careers available. And I think that in the longer term is a very good way to do it, because you're tackling the biases from a variety of perspectives. And we also have a STEPS program for our schools, again, to educate younger children about engineering. And we have to be aware, even in secondary, if you go back and think when you were in secondary making a choice for third level education, a big influence was your peer group and your friends. A lot of people, well, I'll go there because he's going there or she's going there. So we need to be aware of all of those types of dynamics.
Yeah, thanks, Damien. And I agree, it's so important, the role of parents in all of this. And it's interesting that the biases can be passed down the generations. So that's it's quite interesting to think about that. But it's good that you've highlighted as well that having a bias doesn't make you a bad person, and we all have them. And great to hear about strategies we can use. So thank you so much, Damien. Back to you, Tracy. We're hearing here about how we can have these unconscious biases in all aspects of our lives. And Tracy, how important is awareness of unconscious bias in our lives in general?
I think it's very important. Unconscious bias affects all aspects of our lives, both our personal lives and our work lives, and it influences all the decisions that we make. And I think what's kind of tabled here and what people have been discussing, which is very important, it can have a huge impact on our career choice. If you feel, well, I can't really be an engineer because I'm not good at maths, or I'm a girl, or I can't be a nurse because I'm a boy, you should really, it's really important that in helping us pick our career paths, that we match our strength as individuals and make good decisions for ourselves. So I think it's really important to try and, if you're aware of the biases, you can maybe try and set them aside and make it a choice that's best for you and matches what you want to do and what's going to make you happy. And I think as well, just in along our career and through life, being aware of our unconscious biases will influence how we interact with people, how open we are to diverse viewpoints, new ideas and new approaches. And I think if there's an awareness, I think it'll help us as individuals to make sure that we reach our full potential, and that we're not held back as individuals. We don't hold ourselves back, and we don't hold others back as well. And also that we contribute to foster an inclusive environment in our school, in our college, in our workplace, that we all contribute to that inclusivity. And I think awareness is a huge first step, but I think on its own, there needs to be a commitment as an individual to new behaviour, to kind of understanding what our unconscious biases are, and to making conscious decisions to do things differently, or to be open to doing things differently, and behaving in a different way, both positively and, both from a positive perspective and a negative perspective. And I think sometimes, we've just kind of touched on it recently, the whole unconscious bias training, and just the awareness of it. And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day who kind of gave us the course in unconscious bias. And when you kind of go out into the world now and you just have more awareness of it, you just realize that it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. You come across it every single solitary day. And it's just maybe a throwaway comment somebody might make about female driver, or somebody, you know, you're very fit for your age. All these subtle little kind of you know, biases that are there that you know, will you know, are just part of everyday life. And it's just the awareness of it, I think, is really important. But it's, and it's just, it helps. It's a starting point. And I think that's probably, I've said enough on that one.
Yeah, no, you got that. That's really important, Tracy. So thank you for all that. Yeah, you know, that's so interesting there. You're saying about the little subtle comments, because when you think about it, they are everywhere, and they have become sort of part of the normal life and the normal conversation. So we really do have to challenge them and stop and reflect. And also your points there about that biases can be holding us back and stopping us from reaching our full potential and making the best decisions that we could make in order to achieve that potential. So all really important. So thank you so much, Tracy. And if I can come to you next, please, Jean. How have you seen unconscious bias impact people?
I think the sad thing about unconscious bias is how it can hold you back without you even realizing it, because you're making decisions that aren't necessarily accurate based on preconceived ideas that you have. And I think the point that Tracy is making there about awareness is just so important, because when you begin to become aware of your own biases and your own and the assumptions that you are making, you quickly see how other people are making those assumptions about you as well. And I think that when you begin to do that, it kind of changes the way that you look at other people. It changes your outlook, and it changes the way that you consider whether it's your college course or the subjects that you're going to choose for your leaving cert, or, you know, the people that you're going to surround yourself with, because you're maybe more open and more prepared to give people a chance rather than automatically reverting to assumptions about who people are, or the decisions that they're making. I think that the sad thing is that, you know, if we're not aware of our own biases, that we can really have an impact then on people's lives, particularly when you're looking at things from a recruitment perspective. So if you're not bringing that idea of your own biases, or an awareness of your own biases, into a recruitment process, you know, that has an impact on somebody's life, and that rolls on for the longer term. I think that one of the ways that we can be almost insidious in terms of our bias is when we talk about culture. So we talk about people being a good culture fit or not a good culture fit, and obviously we're bringing our own lens to that. So we're talking about well, from my perspective, that person fits here, or that person doesn't fit here. And then you're automatically kind of putting somebody in an in group or in an out group. And that's a very difficult place to be, because we've all had that experience where we didn't quite fit in and we didn't really know why. So you don't want to bring somebody into that environment. But at the same time, if you're making a decision about whether somebody, you know, for a recruitment process or any club or anything like that, whether they belong, you know, if you're kind of saying, well, I don't think they fit here, then you're putting them into the outside group where they're making them uncomfortable. And I think it's important just to bring that idea to something, to anything you're involved in. An awareness that, you know, your unconscious biases are having a direct impact on other people, and that it's really important, as Tracy said, to be aware of them and to kind of challenge your own beliefs about things, so that we can be more inclusive and more welcoming to everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Jean. Gosh, those insights really highlight how, if you have unchecked biases, how it can impact people, and why it's really so important to call them out. And I agree, it's such an important step, having, you know, this awareness and challenging these biases and looking at how they can impact people. And, you know, I really was your point there that if we challenge biases, this can be life-changing, both for ourselves and for the people around us. So thanks so much for that, Jean. And next to you, Rhonda. Rhonda, our biases, we've heard, can impact decisions we make about our future and so on. So what do you think might be the challenges that come to mind when secondary students are considering a course?
Yeah, we have a recent successful female graduate at Schneider, and she was sharing her experience at a STEM group recently. And for her, it was maths. I know Tracy mentioned it earlier on, but she originally thought about not going into engineering because of maths. And I think that's one of the most common ones. And it was only because she looked into it more and realized it was part of it, but it's not the whole piece. And to be honest, most of our roles, my own included, have some maths part. You've got to give some data reporting back, but there are people who can help you with that in the environment. So that would be one key thing I would say to anybody in secondary school thinking about engineering and other roles is don't let a particular subject like maths hold you back, because you can get help in those spaces as well. I think the second one that was mentioned is the social circle. So yes, we all like to be around our friends, but people make their own paths in life, and to really instead dig in and discover, go to those hotel or other events or listen to pieces like this today so that you can really find out. And then the final one would be about role, what people actually think the job is like, and instead go and talk to people and find out, because it's often not what we actually think. I still remember back to my own secondary school and the teachers, the guidance counselors coming in and saying, computer science is needed, people should think about computer science. And to be fair, I automatically probably discounted myself because of maths. I thought, I'm okay at maths, it's not my strength. But to be honest, I didn't even know what they meant at the time by computer science. So I think it's about doing your research. Colleges and other forums are much more open nowadays, I think, than they were years ago, where you can have seminars like this and find out what jobs are like. You can reach out to people on LinkedIn. People are very helpful now in trying to help you uncover what those roles would be like. And probably one other barrier is, as helpful as we are in schools and colleges, we often don't know what those roles entail ourselves. So we need to put people in touch with other people who can explain to them what those positions might be like as well.
Thanks very much, Rhonda. Very good insights there, and especially useful for the secondary school students here today and who would be making these types of decisions. And it's very good to know that you don't have to have studied, even technical subjects. You don't have to study them at Leaving Cert in order to go on a technical program. And really important and good advice for people to research and find out more information about roles and jobs before they make their mind up, and to be aware that they may be coming at it within a bias. So thank you very much for that, Rhonda. So back to you, Tracy. I know you're an EDI advocate in the company you work for. So Tracy, do you think it's important to have an EDI advocate when dealing with unconscious bias in schools, colleges and workplaces?
Thanks, Michelle. I do. I think it is very important. I mean, I can speak for DBFL and say that we kind of identified diversity and inclusion as kind of a key driver for the company growth over the next number of years. And we kind of felt it was very important, an important topic, and it's something that we needed to address formally. And I think, sorry, my sound is a little bit off there.
That's okay, Tracy. Take your time. You're actually, the sound is actually okay, I think.
Well, I suppose just from DBFL's perspective, we identified, I suppose, diversity and inclusion as something as a key driver for the company growth over the coming years. And I feel it's very important that it is formalised and it's supported from management, senior management level, as an important thing to be encouraged. We have a programme. We've had huge support from the Irish Centre for Diversity in setting up policies so that everybody feels when they come to work that they can be their whole selves. I mean, I think that's really important, that when people are at work, they're going to perform better, they're going to feel more valued, and when they don't have to hide part of who they are, or they don't have to maybe hold back any aspect of who they are. So it was just to try and encourage an environment where people could be their whole selves at work. And also we're looking at the moment of the whole, an advocate, somebody that people can go to if they feel that there's maybe an issue or a topic that they'd like to discuss, somebody who's a peer. So for example, if there is an issue that arises in relation to diversity or inclusion or something within the workplace, that they can have a less formal, rather than kind of going to HR or going to maybe a year head, for example, in school, that there's a more kind of peer group advocacy as well, who can kind of intermediate and help deal with any issues that might come up. But very much, I think, from an advocacy point of view, promoting diversity and inclusion is hugely beneficial for a company. It taps into a huge pool of diverse thought, different approaches, different experiences, and it makes everybody feel more included, and it promotes a much more inclusive environment. And I think that's really important in the modern workforce today, and also in the school and college environment as well. That whole kind of diversity and inclusion, and feeling that everybody has a place, everybody has a voice, is really important.
Yeah, thanks very, very much, Tracy. Yeah, it is so important that people have someone they can go to, and it is in a less formal process, as you say, rather than going to HR. And really nice thought there that, diversity and inclusion, for a company, what are they getting out of it? They're getting out diversity of thought, of diversity of approaches, and, that people at work are being their whole selves. So thank you very much for that, Tracy. So moving back to you, Rhonda. Rhonda, are there any unconscious biases that graduates coming into your company have identified?
I'm thinking back to that recent graduate that I mentioned who's been successful. When we take graduates in, we give them experience across as many lines of our business as we can, which they find very useful. And in meeting this particular graduate, she was very honest with me in sharing her experiences coming in. And what I found really interesting was a bit of the kind of age-old, as she started out on site, people, the men obviously offering to carry her tools for her. And it was a really interesting one from a bias perspective, because her initial reaction was, no, I can do it myself, and not taking that help. Whereas I'll be honest, if I can get help from anybody in the company, I will. But she found actually over time there was certain tools she couldn't lift. And it was just, she said to me, Rhonda, it's the way my body is built. And because she is small and slender. And it was kind of, I guess she had her own realization of, I'm trying to be that woman who can show I can do it all, but actually sometimes we still need help as well. So, having those biases around the role, again, both positive and negative. I think the other bias, which I'll touch on later a bit more, is just what she thought the role would be like herself. What our observation of meeting with her regularly and checking in was a little bit of a shock at the start of, getting out in the field, as we call it, and onto sites, and giving yourself time to adjust. And I would say the same for people as you start into college. The first couple of weeks in a course, you can be like, is this for me? I don't know, but you need to give these things time, because she actually started to find herself that although she was the only female on the team, she really enjoyed the team, and they just wrapped their arms around her. So just giving things a chance, I think, as well.
Thanks, Rhonda. Yeah, that's really interesting, and good to point out that biases can be very well intentioned. So they're not always negative. And really good advice there, particularly for the younger people listening today, that roles, when you go into a company, roles are varied, and that you can move into different roles and to sort of challenge your bias around what you think you would be doing in a company. So thanks very much for that, Rhonda. And Damien, just moving back to you, how is Engineers Ireland working with education to break down perceptions or stereotypes?
Well, I suppose we're Engineers Ireland is working on a multi-level approach. I suppose from the body corporate, we've established an Inclusion and Diversity Society, which runs across our members. I suppose its role is to promote inclusion and diversity across all of our Engineering Ireland structures and build awareness of the need to be inclusive. We also have a subgroup of that is Women in Engineering, and that's become very active again in recent times. In the last few years, about 30% of our new members are from overseas, so different cultures, different countries, and I think that has been transformative for our sector and really challenges in a positive way. We also have a STEPS outreach program where we engage with schools, primary and secondary schools throughout the country through a range of engagements during the year. So I'm going to do the advertisement here. Engineers Week is coming up from the 5th to the 11th of March, so please do get involved. Last year we touched about 130,000 primary and secondary school students in that week alone. So it is really popular. The parents get involved, employers get involved, and it's a great showcase for engineering. I'd agree with some of the earlier speakers that there is a maths bias, but I think we need to get away from that. I think, again, I think we have moved a long way from that, but perceptions take a long time to eradicate. I think it still holds the old bias, and perception is there. Engineering programs, we accredit at 3rd level. Engineering programs only teach the maths that is needed for that program. So it's not just teaching mathematics for mathematics' sake. So I think there's much more support for mathematics both at secondary and tertiary level. So I think that problem is hopefully dissipating. We also get student members and engineers to visit secondary schools as role models. And usually we try and get 1st and 2nd year engineering students, because, you know, secondary school students themselves can relate more to people roughly their own age. Again, that's a bias, but and they will see 1st and 2nd year engineering students who are probably walking in the same corridors as them in the secondary school only a few years earlier. So they can relate much better. And I think that's been very productive and allows them to demonstrate the range of fields in engineering and explain that they can make a difference. On our STEPS program for primary and secondary schools, we've engaged with the Girl Guides associations, and we have engineering badges and brownie badges for Girl Guides, and again they prove very popular, and again it allows to break down those barriers and give a better understanding at a very young age, so that you can carry forward. And I suppose we also have a group working on apprenticeships, and this is a very important area. And we use the term professional apprenticeships, and even putting in that word professional changes the perception to a much more positive way. It gets rid of the dirt and the digging holes aspect. And the last thing I would say, we have a salary survey, which we conduct annually. And last year's survey was, I suppose, some interesting results. So a graduate, 1 to 2 years out of college, female graduates earned more than male graduates by about 2%. However, if you look at the 3 to 5 year, so 3 to 5 years out of college, it was 15% the other way. The males were earning 15% more. And it seesaws down for the rest of the career, but females are behind from that point on. But certainly at a graduate level, when they come straight out of college, females earn more. So maybe we need to tackle some of the biases in the workplace around salaries.
Thanks very much, Damien. That's good to hear that about the salaries. And it's fantastic to hear all the great work that Engineers Ireland is doing around breaking down perceptions and stereotypes and, you know, increasing diversity. And I've been involved in STEPS over the years, and I've gone out to schools to speak about engineering. So it's a really worthwhile activity, and I'd really encourage people to get involved in some of those initiatives. So thanks very much, Damien. So back to you, Jean. Jean, what kind of workplace decisions can be affected by unconscious bias?
Well, as I previously said, I think we've touched on the hiring decisions where we can just make poor decisions based on our own biases. But I think, you know, sometimes in a working environment, when you're looking for somebody to do something, you might decide without discussing it that a person is either a fit or not a fit for a particular role. And again, you know, the implications of this can be quite limiting for the organization as well as for the individual, because we're not always aware of exactly the background that somebody comes from or the skills that they may have. One of the things that I'm always very interested in is the idea that you hire for capability rather than hiring for past experience, because if somebody can show you that they have the capability to acquire a new skill, you know, it gives the opportunity to broaden the experience of that individual across, you know, helping retention, potentially helping your diversity and inclusion in a particular area, as opposed to saying, you know, well, I'm looking for competency in that and I need proof that somebody has done that before. So I think the idea of hiring for capability is a really interesting one. And I know that TU Dublin do a lot of work in the area of kind of micro credentials, so that somebody can make a little slight change in their career and then they can do some formal learning as well that supports them and gives them some insights. And you know, I think that's it's a really interesting way to help people develop. The apprenticeship side of things I think is really interesting as well. I think there has been in the past a bias against apprenticeships. Hopefully, I think that's changing now. I think that organizations are understanding the value of having somebody to come on board through a different stream, again, just to broaden the diversity of the pool that you're hiring from. Understanding that if you don't have that diversity, that you're creating an environment where you have groupthink, because if everybody went through the same colleges and through the same courses and has the same life experience, then really it's just a group of people who are all the same, and that there's no room there then for any creativity or any kind of difference of thought. And the value of creating that diversity of thought is immeasurable, because I always think that's kind of where the magic happens. So looking at opportunities to give people routes into alternate careers, or to look at hiring from different sources, I think those are very positive things for organizations.
Thanks very much, Jean. That was a lovely comment there. The diversity is where the magic happens. And you really articulated well there how important it is to companies to have diversity and what they can get from it. So thanks very much, Jean. So moving back to you, Tracy, do you think that celebration of diversity fosters an inclusive work environment or school community?
Yeah, I do. I actually think when we kind of highlight the diversity and embrace it and celebrate it, it does foster definitely a more kind of inclusive environment. I know for my own company, DBFL, we have over the last 12 months, we've kind of made a kind of a conscious effort to celebrate our company's diversity, our cultural diversity, our ethnic diversity. We've marked International Women's Day, International Men's Day, Pride. And actually, we've gotten a huge amount out of it. The company as a whole had really positive feedback. People feel much, I suppose, more secure, safer, able to be themselves, you know, able to, and I think the other positive that comes from it is, if you see it, you can be it. I mean, that's very much a kind of a theme. So if you see somebody ethnic, with huge ethnic diversity, or you see somebody who is different gender, you know, in a position that maybe a role model. We did role model corners for October through and celebrated the ethnic diversity across the company. That's hugely positive, maybe for our graduates coming in, where they can see that there are people at different levels of the company, where so they see that they can achieve and they can move up. So I think it's very important. I also think it's great to celebrate our different experiences. We had some really interesting stories, just people's backgrounds, and just really important to kind of, we all come from sort of different points in life. We've had different life experiences. We bring all of those different life experiences into our work, into our schools, and it's something to be very much celebrated. People will come at problems from different perspectives with different experiences, and it just enhances the whole experience. And I just think if everybody feels that they're part of something, part of the school community or part of a work environment, it's just a much more inclusive, safer environment for people to excel and to achieve for themselves.
Thanks, Tracy. Lovely to hear about all these initiatives and how they can foster a community that values and celebrates diversity, and that we can all stand up and be counted. I love the idea of the role model corners. So thanks very much, Tracy. And moving back to you, Rhonda. So Rhonda, what biases do people have in terms of the roles within an engineering company? So we've talked a lot about roles, but what are the biases that people have in terms of roles?
Damien said it at the start, so thinking that it's all construction. So we would have a variety of roles, and some of them are hybrid roles, and some of them are you're out in the field. So field service engineers are typically mostly out in the field. We would have project engineers or project managers, and that can tend to actually be a hybrid role, which actually a lot of people like. What I've noticed, again, thinking back to the recent graduate example that I shared today, was we're all used to maybe being indoors, whether that's college or school. And some people love the outdoors straight away, but for some people it was actually learning to get used to the outdoors, especially in the winters in Ireland. So getting used to thinking what the job actually might like. And I remember that graduate and thinking at the start, God, are they going to stay? Because they were talking about the cold and winter and it was a bit more difficult out on site. 3 months later, they actually loved it. They gave themselves time to adjust, and what they found worked for them, which they've actually now moved into a project engineer role, is the hybrid. They like a couple of days out on site and a couple of days back in the office. I think the other things that we forget is then within the engineering roles, and I think it was Damien who touched on it at the start as well, there are people who are more upstream in design roles. So I can think of teams that we have and it's more the early design piece. And then there are people who love the execution, where they want to be out on site or they want to be project managing it as well. So as you go through your course, thinking about which are the pieces that you gravitate to, or you get a chance to get experience in companies, try and get out into the field as well as indoors, into the indoor roles. And then finally, I would just say there's also a whole host of roles around. So if I think about a typical engineering company, there's finance, there's HR, and we've actually had engineering and non-engineering graduates come in. We even have somebody in Schneider with a zoology degree who has made a fantastic impact in the company around helping us to better package information for engineers so that they can explain different services. Myself, I'm not a typical engineer. I don't come from that background, and I found Schneider looking for more diversity in backgrounds as well, so we can bring people in who maybe have a passion and service for our customers. So just again, starting to find out where you think your strengths are and how your studies then might relate to that, and just keeping an open mind as you go along the way.
Yeah, great to hear, Rhonda. And it's great to hear that there is that flexibility within companies for people, firstly, to find out, I suppose, what their strengths are, and then to be able to move and, within different roles. So really good to hear. Thank you very much, Rhonda. So moving back to you, Damien. Damien, how can perceptions or gender bias differ within different cultures and different countries?
Okay, well, I mean, it's difficult enough to gain an understanding of our own biases, which drive their own behaviour. Imagine how difficult it is to do it when you're in a multicultural environment. Even simple things like addressing people, getting the gender right, or formality is very important in many cultures and societies. Getting which is the first name, which is the surname. Again, it can be disconcerting. Power distance in societal and professional relationships again makes this operation much more difficult and vastly increases the possibility for misunderstandings. Many cultures again have different biases. If today we were having this discussion in some Asian countries, the debate would be, how do we get more boys and males into engineering? It's a mirror image of what we see here. In Engineers Ireland, many of our new members are from overseas, and so engineering is a global profession, and engineers must be prepared to work across the globe in different roles. But say engineers coming into Ireland, I mean, there can be a bias about engineering qualifications, yet these engineers in the other countries are building bridges, they supply electricity, water, computer systems the same as us. So there's still work to be done, I think, to change some biases, and that's not just the engineering profession, it exists across other professions. Engineering professions and qualifications are accredited to similar standards. There are agreed standards to facilitate this exact mobility, and I think they need to be strengthened. But I think as a profession, compared to others, we are ahead on recognising mobility and qualifications. And I think that's been a great help to a mobile global profession. But even step back to a simple level, biases can go back to food, which is something that's inherently part of our culture. A friend of mine was in rural Africa many years ago teaching in a school, and he was invited to a house, a student's house one evening for dinner, and they produced a plate of raw chicken. This was the culture, and he was wondering, how am I going to cope with this situation? and eventually just said, look, in my culture, we think it's not good to eat raw chicken meat. And the host said, well, that's fine, that's okay. And I think, you know, it sounds very trite or simple, but it's a very important lesson there. You know, on the global stage, we're stepping into someone else's culture. They are stepping into ours. And with that, we're all carrying our own baggage of biases. So if we can take the approach that, you know, don't take offense where none is intended, and carry that as an adage, I think, you know, and if we do make mistakes, have the courage to say it so that we don't perpetuate any unconscious mistakes we make. I think then we will be on a good road.
Thanks very much, Damien. Yeah, that's an important point there. Don't take offense where none is intended. And again, to be able to do that, it's all about awareness and understanding and, you know, realizing and that there is diversity and difference. Very interesting there, I just have to say, about the different cultures, and that in some countries, engineering is considered primarily, you know, a female occupation. Really, really interesting. So thanks for that, Damien. And finally, we're coming back to you, Jean, for the last question. So where can someone here today learn more about unconscious bias? Or, you know, after listening to all the really good insights today, where would a person go next?
I suppose the first thing that I would suggest is that after listening to all of the insights today, and I mean, every speaker, there's lots of little nuggets there of really, really good advice, is maybe to take a step back and look at themselves before they do anything else, and just think about their own biases, or maybe situations that you've been in where, you know, you've made a decision about somebody or something, and it turned out not to be right, and try and understand where that decision making process came from. I would suggest that people keep an eye out for more events like this, because the more that you hear about a topic like unconscious bias, the more that, as Tracy said earlier, you start to see it in everyday life. And, you know, I was reading a thread on Twitter recently about clothes for girls and boys, and how the labeling, the branding that's on girls' clothes tends to be, the slogans tend to be around things like "be kind" or "princess," whereas the slogans for boys' clothes tend to be on things like, you know, "strong" and "powerful" and "build the future." And just to be aware that kind of messaging is perpetuating the problems that we're talking about here, and layering things into your consciousness that you know, until somebody draws your attention to them, you mightn't see them. So I would say just take a bit of time, do a little bit of research. If it's a topic that interests you, keep an eye out for more webinars like this, and try and learn as much as you can along the way.
Thanks very much, Jean. That's a good note to finish on. You have lots of good advice given to people there, and particularly struck me there to be aware that this messaging, if you like, is around us, is all around us in our environment. So thanks very much for that, Jean. And that brings us to the end of the session. And I'd just like to thank hugely everyone here today. So thank you so much to Yvonne, who was our keynote speaker, and to the 4 panelists. It was so insightful. I've learned loads today, so thank you so much. And Rebecca, do you want to remind them about the survey?
Hey, thanks. What a brilliant event. Yeah, the survey, please do. It's only 5 questions, and it really adds value to these, to hear your perspective. So thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone, and lovely to hear from you. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.